Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed product launches that we did. It was a pretty exciting day for us today. And now we have a very special guest. You all either know this company, or I'm pretty sure every one of you are using this product or have used this product in the past. We have Thomas Dohmke, CEO of GitHub. Thomas, welcome to HackerRank AI Day.
Hey, it's so great to be here.
Awesome. This video stream is being watched by thousands of developers, recruiters, engineering leaders across the globe. And one of the common questions that I think all of these personas have is developer going to be a job in the future?
Absolutely. Yes, I totally believe that we are going to have even more developers than we have today. If you look at the past 50 years or so, since the 70s when the personal computer was invented, it has only grown the number of developers. And while a lot of us like to work on, the newest stuff, a lot of developers out there are also still working on mainframes and COBOL and managing PHP and Perl applications, right? So there's always this huge amount of code that already exists, plus we're adding more every single day. In fact, there isn't many companies where developers don't add more code every day than they're deleting, right? They're all increasing the volume, increasing the masses of code that we have to manage and innovate on top of.
I think you talked about this in the New York Times article about like Symphony and Orchestrator. In fact, like we internally think about this as well, like, hey, the job of a developer in the future is going to be an orchestrator of AI agents. So as much as you say that there is the job of a developer will remain, I'm assuming the job will significantly change, correct? Is that how I should interpret?
Yeah, I liked it. Actually, said orchestra, the orchestra of agent, and the developer is the conductor, right? Like them basically orchestrating all these musicians, the agents within the orchestra. I mean, what do developers do today, right? Like they have already a set of tools, a toolbox that is part of their life cycle. Whether it's your operating system, your container solution like Docker, like your VS Code. It comes with a compiler and a debugger and a profiler and lots of extensions. And so you have a language server and all these kind of things, then you push it into Git, and in Git, in GitHub, you have a pull request review, and you have your GitHub Actions, continuous integration, continuous deployment, CI/CD workflow, right? Those are all, simple agents, if you will, right? They work in a certain environment. And the biggest difference between those kind of, we call them bots or tool or batch scripts or whatever in the past, right? The biggest difference between this and an AI agent is that the tools we have today, they're all scripted, right? So we kind of like define in advance of what they're going to do. And then they take our input value and they run over our tests. And when the test breaks, then it shows red. And then you have to read through all the log files and whatnot. With the agents, the runtime is much more non-deterministic, right? Because and the models are more intelligent, and so it might actually run your test. They fail, and then it can self-heal that test and then submit back into your pull request. So I think that's the difference between the future state where you have all these agents around you and the current state. But ultimately, as developers, we've always strived, to get better, right? Like we've always bought better laptops, with more cores. So we can get to the next level, upgrade from a level 50 warrior to a level 90 healer, I guess.
I was born in late 80s, early,
Yeah.
and then like started to learn to program like somewhat like mid 90s or so, just with the rise of internet. And I remember getting stuck in an error state, and then like looking at Stack Overflow, looking at forums, like figuring it out. It took me like whatever, like 2-3 hours. But then once you solve that problem, it's just like a state of high, wow, this is amazing. I fought, I got it, and I figured out how to solve it. But today you can actually ask an AI, and it's most likely going to firstly tell you the answer, if not even teach you. It's just going to say, hey, let me just like go ahead and fix. As much as AI is going to improve productivity and like, make it better, what do you think the new age generation of developers would lose? Because the whole notion of you trying to find the answer was not just about the answer. You started to go in different parallel threads. You would start to learn a lot more. You would explore a lot more things. Do you think, what do you think the new age developer would lose?
the first thing they're losing is all the frustration, that I had as a kid when I couldn't figure it out because there wasn't a Stack Overflow I could go to, right? Like I had a book and I had magazines and, many of these Commodore 64 and Data PC magazines didn't even have the listings in them. They had only checksums, and you had to send a postcard with stamps to get a disk with the software to decode all those checksums, so you could actually get the listings. Because the checksums, you could print more hex numbers into the same amount of space as code, right? So that was a way for the magazine to kind of like save space on a page. And so, that was frustrating, right? Like you would go to bed and you couldn't figure it out. And my parents didn't know how to code. My younger brother learned it, the same way as I did it. And so like you would go to bed and hopefully the next morning you had a fresh idea. Or you frantically started looking through the pages in books on figuring out, what command could I have overlooked or maybe have misinterpreted how the processor worked. And obviously, today's developers in 2025 know very little about the CPU and the instruction set of the CPU. You might learn that in university as part of your fundamental education. But when you're working, at GitHub or at HackerRank or Microsoft or where else, most folks don't know the instruction set of the CPU, let alone, the bits and bytes or the registers, the cache and all that stuff. So we lost all that along the way, right? We learn it when we need to have it, and AI will make that actually quite easy, right? You can always go to Copilot and ask a question about a concept that you need in that moment. And I think that's going to be the really democratizing effect, especially for kids that want to learn, that don't have parents at home with a technical background, that don't have access to the same education and technology that you and I, clearly have. And so I think that democratizing effect. And then the other thing is, I grew up in Germany, you grew up in India. My first language wasn't English. I didn't learn English until 1991, I think is when I started learning English. And English is the language of software development. Not only because on GitHub and Stack Overflow and elsewhere, people communicate in English, but also most programming languages, if you look into the keywords, right, they're like a reduced vocabulary of the English language, right? And so being able to ask questions in German or in Hindi, Brazilian Portuguese, any major language as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old that is fascinated by Minecraft or by YouTube and wants to build their own software, is going to be so much easier for them. And they can just type it. It has infinite patience. Most parents don't have infinite patience. You can ask as many questions as you want. You can ask it to find the bug. You can ask it to convert Python to Java if you want to go down that path. And so it really unlocks, a new level of learning. And I could be more excited about that.
That's awesome. I mean, if you look at the evolution in general, I'm sure you'll have seen this. I was not part of the punch cards era, so if I'm misrepresenting something, please correct me. You had punch cards, assembly language, C++, Python, and now AI, like different abstractions, levels of abstractions. Again, like a crude approximation in this one. And I'm sure there's always the view from a C++ developer talking to a Python person saying, hey, you need to know much more about memory allocation and all of those things, because if you don't know the fundamentals, you can't get there. And I'm sure the Python developer is now talking to the AI first native person saying here are some fundamentals that you need to learn. Now it's pretty clear that if I'm going to work in a company, I don't need to really get to know the registers, the CPU, and I'm probably not even going to use all my algorithms on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But what would you say is what level of fundamentals of computer science do you think, hey, every developer needs to have at a bare minimum, even though you're going to prompt in English, you're going to have AI that's going to code, because a lot of them use cloud, but I don't know how many of them know the fundamentals of distributed systems, which is probably okay. How do you think about what is the threshold? What is the minimum level of fundamentals that developers need to learn?
I think the aspiration that we need to have is that we teach the fundamentals of computer science to all kids in school in the same way that we teach them the fundamentals of physics and chemistry and geography and history. And of course, literacy and math and all these things. I think computer science should be part of that formal education. And that, you see it in some schools already that start very early with something like Scratch from MIT, or they use something like code.org to go through more, learning courses. I think some middle schools on the West Coast teach Python. for a year or so. And I think the curiosity that kids have is actually perfect for that. You don't have to make it as dry as, the P equals NP theorem and things like that, right? Like theoretical computer science that can stay in university. But I think you should give everybody those fundamental understandings, because a lot of what we do, when we interact with computers, when we interact with buttons, are very similar to these control flows to the basics of computer science, right?
Yeah.
And that's why Scratch is so great, because you model it visually first, and then you can take that into little robots, whether that's Lego robots or other electronics where they're using similar control flows, and then you make the switch and go over to something like Python. And I think that's the moment when you want to have a co-pilot available to basically explain to you how this works and takes you on that journey. And so you can then figure out yourself of how much computer science you want to learn. Many of us, I learned coding way before I had formal computer science education. In many ways, in hindsight, university feels like something I did to have the title, not to learn coding. I knew coding. I had success with commercial projects before I even started university, right? So those two things are, like, I think, orthogonal, and they're much choice of that you're making in your career path. In the same way that if you love biology in school, that doesn't mean you become a biologist, right? That might just stay your hobby. And you're just still deciding, there's other professions where I can make more money.
That is incredible. And that's very, very, very exciting. And you touched upon this a little bit, almost in terms of like how the hiring process is changing, or you are planning to change to incorporate much more of AI knowledge, or the ability for you to work with AI agents as well. In a perfect world, how would you construct like a hiring process? Because now, I mean, there are like, it's always one of those things where developers are never satisfied. And I don't know if there's like ever a perfect solution, but I'm sure like there are ways that we can get better. Like I jokingly say, if you ever want to get on the front page of Hacker News, just write a post about developer hiring process. You're going to get there. I'm just curious to say, in this AI world, perhaps AI is going to quote unquote solve a lot of the standard types of problems and exercises that people are using in the world. So maybe that's like a forcing function for people to even reconsider. What advice would you give to HackerRank or like any of the other companies as well? Like, hey, here's how you should probably consider your hiring process to change.
The standard exercises surely will go away, in the same way that tests in universities will have to dramatically change, especially the homework assignments, where the professor cannot. Actually, in an interview loop, we do homework assignments as well, right? So you can't really check how the applicant or the student has done the homework. Well, and then they're going to use AI because that's the smart thing to do. And in fact, I think we should invert that and think about it as in, you're going to create homeworks where you have to use AI to get the job done. Where either the assignment is so complex that if you don't use an agent or an orchestra of agent to implement all that, to design it all, then you never get it done in the time that you had allocated, or you have to spend so much time and nights on it that you're probably afterwards thinking, maybe I shouldn't really apply for that job in the first place, because if the expectation is that I can solve this big task in such a short amount of time. I think if you look at chat as an example, and prompt engineering obviously has been quite the debate for a while now. I think more and more we're not going to see that as prompt engineering in a way of hacking the model to get an output that you couldn't otherwise get. I think we're going to see it as AI engineering, and the fundamental understanding that a full stack developer, and full stack is not only going to be backend and frontend anymore, it's going to be backend, frontend, and model. And a model needs evaluations, and it needs an inference API. It needs responsible AI practices and red teaming and safety testing and all those things, right? We expanded the amount of work that a full stack engineer has to do. Well, that means that in an interview loop, you want to also check for these things. And so I think, the exercises will adjust for that, and they will be ever more so complex. And they will specifically check whether, you can prompt a model and you can use an agent, and then maybe you even use an agent playground, and you get asked, to explain the temperature parameter and do these things together. And maybe you even use an agent to integrate a model in an app to create something remarkable for a coding exercise.
Yeah, no, that is certainly very, very exciting. And if you put these two things in play, which is you're going to have a lot of the roles overlap and collapse, and then like each person will have an agency of 100 or 1000x. why do you believe it's a very promising future? If I put these two things together, it feels like, yeah, whatever people are now doing with 1,000 people, I can do it with 10 people. I know Jevons paradox and lump of labor fallacy and all of
I
those
was
things.
waiting for
I
you
don't
to
know how
manage
much,
it, mention it.
yeah, I don't know how much we say that just to comfort ourselves that, hey, there's a role for humans in the world. Um, Curious to hear, like, how do you reconcile the two? What are your thoughts?
Because we humans never run out of ideas, right? Like whether you're a small startup or a company like GitHub or even larger like Microsoft, we have an endless backlog, an infinite number of ideas. If I within GitHub, we have lots of repos, with documented feedback from customers, and I can go back into the customer feedback list, and there's things there from 2014, 2016, with lots of sellers saying my customer wants this too, my customer wants this too, and we still haven't gotten to it. It's not because we are ignorant and don't want to implement these things. It's because there's so many other things we can also do, and then it becomes a question of the opportunity cost. Which of those has the higher cost versus the higher return of investment, or you mentioned X a couple of times. The higher excitement for people out there, because let's face it, that also plays a role. What's the better announcement when I go on stage and talk about what's new for GitHub? And so the backlog is infinite. And we have collapsed roles, right? Like startups usually don't have PMs and engineers, and often if they have designers, it's like half a person or a contractor for a while, because you can get so much done. But as then your team grows and the project you're working on is growing, you want these specialized roles, because the product manager is somebody who's talking with customers all the time, processing competitive information, like what are the competitors doing, what do I see on social media, what are the sales team and the marketing telling me. And so collecting all that information, processing it, that's the PM role. And I don't see AI doing that for you, for the engineer. And even if AI would do that for the engineer, I think they would rather still offload it to another team member, saying you're the one using agents to collect all that information, process it, then order the backlog and tell us what comes next. And similarly, for design, visual design, creating a brand, AI can help you with that. But if you just go to ChatGPT and ask it to generate a brand for you, or an image, it's pretty generic. It lacks personality. It lacks all the skills that a designer has learned during their formal education and building their portfolio and whatnot. So I think that's why these roles exist, because we assign different human skills to them, and each of these humans will be a conductor of the orchestra, and with the goal of bringing that infinite backlog down. And why I'm excited and why I'm thinking, we're never going to run out of work, is that we never run out of ideas as humans. And the only thing that is happening is that what we're doing today will become so trivial that we are inventing much more complex things. Even after coding for, almost 30 years as a professional developer, I still have to learn a lot every single day on new code bases. And I think that's never going to go away. It's just the complexity we're sitting on an exponential curve, and it's really hard to stay up to date when you're on that exponential curve. And so we need these agents. We need AI to actually keep going with the curve.
Last couple of questions. I know we're coming up, man. Super fascinating conversation. Yeah. I would love to continue if you didn't have a hard stop. But what do you think is the bottleneck for agents or models to actually get better in software development?
Today, it's really clear, right? It's compute, data, and time. And the compute, training compute, you've read it all over the news, who's building which big cluster in billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And so compute is a limiting factor. More compute still means better models, more and more reasoning models, or distilled models. But at the end of the day, you're still limited by the available compute. You're limited by the available data. And so there's more creative processes now running of how to collect these data sets, labeling them, generating synthetic data, those kind of things. But data certainly remains, an undiscovered land to large parts, and using that data to train even better models. And then it's just time. there isn't really a bottleneck, I'd say. If you look at how much Copilot, we launched the preview in June 2021. Now it's March, so that's like March 2025. So it's almost 4 years ago. Look at how much that world has changed from GPT-3 and Codex through 3.5, 4, 4.5, and I didn't even mention all the T's and O's and whatnot, right? So that the models have massively improved. The underlying data has massively improved. The feature set from auto-completion to chat, to writing pull request summaries, to finding bugs, fixing vulnerabilities, to now agent mode, and soon enough we will have 3 agents that work on a subset of issues in the same way that self-driving cars already work, as long as you geofence it, right? Like and Waymo in San Francisco is geofenced, and so if you geofence your software problem, you're soon enough going to have an agent that can solve it. And so I think the more we work on this, the better these tools will get. And in many ways, it's still early days, and in others, we have come a long way, and it's really exciting to see what's going to come next.
That is very exciting. Lastly, for wrapping up, would love to, if I were a developer, maybe new grad as well as like a senior developer, you can give suggestions to both. What would you like me to do? And then if I were a hiring team, this can be recruiter and engineering, what is the one thing you would like the hiring team to do?
For the student or early in career, or even the kid, I would say use Copilot. Make it part of your day-to-day. That doesn't mean you always have to ask a question in chat, and you don't always have to accept something from auto-completion, right? There's a balance between you staying in the flow and you're using AI to increase your flow or get back to it. Try out coding with agent mode. There's simple examples, building a snake game, building a calculator, just building a simple web page with HTML and JavaScript, and just see what it gets you, and then ask it to change something. And you cannot quickly learn that small changes work if the file is relatively small. If you have a huge file that you're working in, these models all struggle to make changes as the context window is limited, and the more you feed into the model, the harder it is for it to find the changes it needs to make across that file. And so kind of like get familiar with the AI and don't see it as something you want to stay away from because you fear that it takes over your job, because that fear will become true if you're not staying up to date with the state of the technology. That's always been true for software developers. If you didn't get into open source and you didn't learn jQuery and Angular and React, if for example as a front-end developer, and you just stayed with Microsoft front page, you have a very different job today than those that have learned all these technologies, that have learned how to create a pull request in open source, or fork an open source project, work on a new feature, send it back, get the critical feedback, which often is such a big part of our engineering teams, right? The collaboration part is often more important than the code that you're actually writing. And I think that goes to your recruiter question. I think, coding exercises are all great, and, showing how much you're familiar with the technology, and showing your resume and your CV and whatever, your university title. That's all cool. But like the reality is, in most engineering teams, is you're forming a team of humans, and humans working together, whether it's in the professional software development scenario, or whether it's soccer players or Formula One teams. If the team is not vibing, if they're not able to find a way of working together, if they're not able to build a culture that's actually productive and creative, innovative, it's not going to work. And I think that's the AI or not in recruiting. I think that's going to be crucial, and often that works very well in small teams and small startups, and becomes harder and harder as the company is bigger, as different subcultures and what have you. And so I think that's the crucial part, in addition to all these AI skills that you definitely will have to have.
That is awesome. Thomas, very, very inspiring. It was felt like a good chat and a good conversation. That's the vibe that I was going. This is different from the vibe coding from Margaret. But really, really appreciate your time. Yeah, I think it was very inspiring, very insightful. Thank you so much.